Welcome, everyone, back to Excellerate Podcast Episode 2. Two very special guests. I have Nicole Raimundo and Shannon Ludwig. First, let me do some introductions. Nicole is an award-winning technology executive, CIO of the Town of Cary, where she's been for almost 7 years. Prior to that, at the City of Raleigh as the IT Chief Operating Officer. And prior in her career, Fidelity Investments. We're going to hear a lot more from Nicole about her background and her journey there later in today's talk. But really excited to have her. And Shannon Ludwig, who's SVP of Sales at NWN Carousel for over 16 years. Shannon, can you believe it's been 16 years? It's been incredible. Doing everything from account executive, selling manager, partner with incredible customers and customer relationships. About the relationship that Shannon, you formed with Nicole over those 8 years working together. But before we get into it, we're going to be talking about your stories, the journey to CIO, your path together. We're going to hear in part 2 about the work that you've done together. To want to hear more about those projects. And part 3, we're going to talk all about the future. What's upcoming, what's on your radar, tools, technologies, funding, everything about it. So let's get into it. Nicole, would love to start with you. Maybe you could introduce yourself better than I did about your journey to CIO at the Town of Cary.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, you did a fabulous job. Yeah, so I worked, like you mentioned, I worked in the private sector for a long time in technology and building out applications, development teams across the world, and had the opportunity to kind of come back to my roots a little bit in development and go work for City of Raleigh, which was a very rewarding experience, but it was an interesting switch to go from private industry to public. Obviously, I've found a passion for it and love for it as I've continued, and I've stayed and moved over to the CIO for Cary. And I'd love to share a little bit more about kind of our journey working together and where we've come from and where we're going. So look forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. And Shannon, how about you? What's your, you could probably do a better job, but
I probably can. Thank you, Andrew. So a little background about myself is I was fortunate enough to be there was a small group of us that started a company called Forefront Systems back in the .com days. And there was very few of us in those .com days that survived, and we were one that did. We then were acquired and then acquired again by a company called NWN. And then that in itself was history. And as you said, from the beginning, I've been in a number of different roles. I started out in sales to director to VP and then SVP. And let me tell you, 20 years ago, being a female in this industry, it was different. I didn't look like everybody. I didn't talk like everybody. I remember going into just being in these elevators, going up to the top floor, getting ready to meet with all of these CEOs from a variety of different companies. And I'd have my heels on and everybody else had on their shoes. I took so many pictures of that looking into it. But I have been working with the Town of Cary, was one of my customers back. You were graceful with me, Andrew. You said 16 years. It's actually been 20 years because that didn't count the Forefront editions. So, but thank you. You make me a lot younger than what I actually am.
That's what every good podcast host does, right?
Yes, but people ask. A couple extra years. Yes, people ask how I have been here for 20 years and continue to be challenged, and it is because of working with customers like Nicole that I've had the opportunity to, and my team. So those are two things that you can't replace, and I've just enjoyed every year of it.
That's awesome. And we're going to get more into, my daughter, is definitely loves STEM. We talked about that on the prep call and how to get more women, more leadership roles, more opportunity, which is so important because you're both incredible, a testament to, leadership and what's possible. Maybe we could start. So Nicole, you're from our hometown of Boston. You're a Boston bred. Maybe you could start, what was your journey down to North Carolina, but your journey to CIO, like take us through, how you got into it and how you ultimately ended up where you are today.
Yeah.
What's your story?
I did relocate. I relocated, which we talked about, with Fidelity down to North Carolina, although Boston will always be my home. And I had this unique opportunity to go work for the public sector. And I really was at a point where I felt like there was something special about being able to kind of give back and make a difference in the community that I had really just moved to. And so I took a position with Raleigh. I learned very quickly the difference between being incredibly blessed to work in an organization for Fidelity. I worked there for a long time, and taking technology for granted, our access to it. Mm-hmm. And when you then go into a government and you don't have those same technologies available to you, but you know that what it takes to make a difference, right? So what I mean by that is the folks that were there when I got there were, in the same thing in Cary, they're incredibly smart. They work incredibly hard, but they just don't know what they don't know, right? So they didn't have the exposure or the luxury to be in an environment where they could try new technology, even know what new technology was or how to implement it and use it, because they just didn't have that experience. So they were working really hard, probably too hard, I would say, getting through the day, leveraging the technology that they had at hand. So for me, that was an exciting opportunity to kind of share and help governments kind of grow and learn and understand how to take advantage of technology to actually make their jobs easier and get more efficient and better results. And so I did that, over in Raleigh for a few years, actually I would say probably 7 years, and then had the opportunity to go over to Cary as their CIO. And I jumped at that opportunity to kind of lead the organization. Same thing, through a big sort of transformation, which I think we'll talk about. But there is something really special about working for a community that you work and live and play with, that you can see the results of the work that you do every day.
That's huge. And Shannon, you're also either a resident or a close resident of Town of Cary. What does it mean to partner up with Nicole over the past few years? And I met both of you 3 years ago, and I'm like, this is the one of the tightest groups of just supporting each other. And it's more than just a business relationship. It feels like that you both have together.
Exactly. And yes, I am a resident of Cary, Andrew, and it's been exciting to see what Nicole has done.
What does it mean, as far as your background, for working and partnering with folks that you have these relationships with? What's that meant for your career?
Oh, it's meant everything. Our partnerships are key to not my success, but the success of the town and the work that we do, and making sure that we pick the right partners, right, that really understand, have that same passion for making a difference, and really put the town first before anything else. I remember when I got to the town and realized there was no wireless infrastructure. And that was one of the very first projects that we had worked on together. And not only was that instrumental in the transformation of the organization of like, wait, we can be mobile and I can bring a laptop and come into your space and talk and work. But it was instrumental in our journey to smart cities too, right? So while it was this fundamental technology, and internally, it was interesting because there was a lot of pushback against it, but we broke through that. It was instrumental in the way people worked. And then it was instrumental in the fact that we turned our campus into a lab to learn about smart cities and IoT technology. And without having that wireless network and the security in place that you all helped us architect and implement, we would not be where we are today, because that piece is so critical to the way that we're able to understand IoT technology moving forward. It also it gave us a lot of credibility internally and with our council, which, they are our sign off of our funding sources, because we took time to really learn the technology and showcase it and do it in a manner that was very thoughtful and safe. So we weren't going to go just put in smart parking because that was the new cool thing to do 5 years ago. We were going to try smart parking, and we did, and we still have them right across the street, part of our campus, because we really wanted to test it and prove out the technology, make sure we understood how to do integrations, make sure we understood all the technology that needed to be in it, and really make sure that it was something that was going to be scalable. So for the parking, which I just mentioned, we learned we would never do that again. We installed the little, I call them the hockey pucks, probably because I am from Boston, in the ground, and they worked great, but it's just it's not functional for us to deploy those. We would have to, in 4 or 5 years, stick them all out. And there's been such advances in parking technology since then. So when you think about such a small thing as wireless, right, and installing that on our campus, it had such an amazing and huge impact on our organization, and especially the work that we're doing going forward. As simple as it is, right?
It's incredible how, we take these things for granted now, right? And in many towns, they don't even have, wireless. So maybe we could take a step back, Shannon, Nicole, when you started, what did you find, right? You mentioned some pushback. What were the kind of dynamics in play? What was the technology that you found? And then what was sort of the vision for what you were, as a team kind of thinking about, and how was the approach to kind of go from there to where we were maybe when we found you 3 years ago, and then we could talk about what we've done, since the pandemic.
Sure. And I'll start, and Shannon, certainly feel free to jump in. When I got there, and I think I kind of mentioned it a little bit in Raleigh too, amazing, super sharp people working incredibly hard. The service level that Cary produces to their citizens, I honestly don't think anyone can top. But the technology infrastructure was old. It was outdated. It was archaic, and it was certainly not set up for the future. There were lots of silos, lots of applications. An old data center, like we mentioned, no wireless. We actually blocked internet access to all of social media, all of those things as well. It just wasn't set up in a manner that we were going to be able to succeed in the future. And I think for us at that time coming in, the skill set also wasn't there, right? And so we needed to bring in folks internally to our own team that could understand why moving to the cloud would be important, why redoing our data center needs to be in a place where we can use it for the future. We talked about the Wi-Fi, how to make sure it's secure. And so there's a lot of different components in all of that we just didn't have the expertise to do. And so that's really where this partnership for me came into play. That was like, okay, you need to help us get future ready, because we are not future ready.
And I think that was one of the fun things that we got to do with Nicole. Is we initially came in to her as a partner that was going to get her future ready with her wireless, with her LAN and WAN and security, and he went through that. And then we took it to a place where it was, okay, what do you want to achieve out of this? What is your goal? We get your wireless working, we do this. How is this going to help you push through your plan? And started really doing a lot of active listening with the Town of Cary and Nicole, just to understand what that looked like. And then we were able to get the cool effect. Some of the things that they did was, okay, I'm a resident in Town of Cary. They did some things like, we're going to create a swap spot. Like, oh, really? What's a swap spot? Well, that's where we're going to be able to have cameras across from these parking spots that you can come and meet people for Craigslist. You feel protected. You've got the police view watching right across the street. And that was something that was different. You didn't get that. Mm-hmm. And then you start talking with them. Okay, well, what else do you want to do? Well, we're building a lot into downtown. We want to make it easy for people to come into downtown. And that's where Nicole had mentioned, some of the things happen with the parking sensors. That was a great idea. Some great ideas, you need to take a step back and say, okay, great idea, but how can we improve it? And those are some of the things that we've looked at. I mean, you come into Cary, you're able to, they did some things with Waze where as a resident, I'm able to come in and say, hey, I want to go to the theater tonight. What is it? Where can I park? On what street? And how can I make this easy? So it's things like that we've enjoyed being a part of.
Yeah, and I was told, it's not a citizen, it's really a resident, mm-hmm. Is really the mindset. And I think it's a different way of thinking about it, Nicole, that you brought up, because it's, a citizen's very sort of cold. You're a citizen, you're a voter. A resident is somebody who lives there, who really thrives there. You're really coming at it from a different posture, it feels like. You mentioned the pushback. I don't mean to go there all the time, but the dynamics at play in trying to get, building a coalition to really get stuff done in a town. How did you approach that as the CIO? What did that look like?
Yeah, it was interesting actually, even just with the wireless, again, because I think they just didn't think about it because they're able to do their work. And, I always think about if I can, press a button on Amazon, something's going to be delivered tomorrow. We should, be pretty close to offering those type of services and expectations. And with our deputy town manager, he just couldn't grasp, why would I need wireless in our buildings and outside? And, I simply asked him when he goes home, I'm like, where do you work? We all work after hours, right? Let's be honest, right? So I'm like, where do you work? I'm like, do you have an office? Do you sit on your couch? Do you sit on your, sit at the kitchen island? And he's like, oh, sometimes I sit at the kitchen island or whatever. And I'm like, oh, you must have a really, really long Ethernet cord. And he's like, no, I'm on my home Wi-Fi. I go, oh, really? Exactly. And it was a little bit of a light bulb moment. You never really thought about it. And I'm like, the way we all work at home and the way you go somewhere else, whether it's a coffee shop, this is the way we should be working in our organization and thinking about delivering those services the same exact way to our citizens. So it really took this whole culture shift within the organization to start to think about how do we do work differently and not be afraid of it, And so that was really our journey that we started. We did, I think, a lot of the typical things other folks have done where we had internal hackathons that really weren't based on developers, but it was bring us your ideas. So really from the departments, come bring us your ideas. Let's figure out how we can make processes better, make things flow. How can we use technology to help make your jobs easier? But it was a really big culture shift. And if you can't shift the culture, you're never going to be able to sustain transformation.
And you were known as a government rebel. I think that's what they called you. Share with us how that came to be.
Yeah, so as we're, our teams are, it's kind of a cross section. We're really thinking about how are we going to flip the organization to make it okay to try new things, to not be afraid of technology. I think previous to when I came in, it was kind of like what's behind the big black curtain, right? Mm-hmm. And we ended up having an open house and inviting everyone in and kind of showcasing. But I think we needed something to grasp onto, how do we get a group of us that can infiltrate the culture, change it, and let it be okay. And so we really needed a name, right? Like a brand. Like we needed a brand, a marketing campaign. And that's where we came up with the Gov Rebels. It was like, it's okay to think differently, right? Like, it's all right. It's a good thing. And it was something that everyone could kind of get behind and then feel good. Like, I want to be a part of the Government Rebels, you know, like I want to do some change. So at the time, it was super important that we did that. And I think it helped, you know, shift the organization, added some excitement. You felt part of something. So that's really where that came from.
I love that.
I love it.
Nothing like a good rebel, taking the hill and you know, getting scrappy and really being inclusive. You know, so it sounds like, you know, at the beginning, the two of you, you know, really partnered up. You worked on some of the core infrastructure, the wireless, you know, the fundamentals, what you've been working on over the past several years. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, some of the new projects and maybe what happened during the pandemic and how those investments really help sustain, you know, the community and your teams, you know, collectively.
Yeah, I think the pandemic was eye-opening for lots of folks. You know, thankfully we were well positioned because we had thought about what that future looked like. We, you know, had always had this work from anywhere goal, so we were well on our way. You know, one of the big things though that I will say is wireless is great and access to the cloud is phenomenal too, but not all of our applications are in the cloud, right? We're not all there. And so the ability to be able to VPN and be successful, right? That was one of the other big initiatives that we had worked with NWN was. So, you know, being able 100% being able to do your job was incredibly important during the pandemic. It accelerated our need for thinking about our citizens and I'll say maybe a little bit of parental sanity of them working and homeschooling and doing all of these things and being able to get outdoors. We're fortunate in North Carolina that we have nice weather most of the year. So thinking about how to expedite putting in Wi-Fi in as many places as we can. Something we don't all have the expertise in. And there's a lot that goes into that in terms of surveys and all of that. And, you know, Shannon can certainly speak to all the technical pieces of it, but those were pieces that I think have been accelerated and where they were more of a nice to have before, they're almost fundamental, right? They're almost an expectation now. So I think, and with that, you know, that's going to allow for us to do a lot more creative or innovative work in terms of using sensors and being able to count people and know how many people, and it's not even how many, like really like, what are the busy times in the park, right? Like, is the shelter full of people? Because if I'm, you know, want to bring my children and do math homework for whatever reason outside, right? You know, I want to know what that looks like. And so having this type of technology in there kind of shifts the way that I think we have all shifted in our lives over the past 3 years, right? I think work, life, I don't think it's a balance. I think it's just integrated. It's the way I look at it. We do it all times of day. And so with that in mind, I think it opens up opportunities for us to better serve our community.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Shannon, maybe you give the rundown on the projects, right? Some of the brass tacks that you guys have executed together as a team.
Sure. So as Nicole had stated, we've been working together for a number of years with her before the crisis hit, COVID. And one of the things that we talked about that neither one of us really appreciated is how prepared her and her team were for that and what took place. Everybody talks about, okay, all of a sudden COVID hit and everybody had to work from home. You got that phone call, we're completely shut down. But there were several steps that were taken in the 3 years prior to, or several years prior, even longer than that, to prepare for that. And as Nicole had said, when that day came and everybody went home, it went smooth, almost scary smooth because of the preparations and different things that were in place. And then you scroll down and you've got, okay, now we're back to our new normal. How do you operate in the new normal? You've got people that now some want to come back to work. Some are in offices, some are in shared spaces. Like these are all different things that you have to deal with in this hybrid workplace. And so those are some of the projects that we work on with her is how can we make it seamless? How can we make it easier? How can we make it seem like whether Shannon's in the car on this podcast or in her shared space or sitting in Nicole's home, what can we do? We've still got areas of improvement, and that's the challenge. And it's changing every day. As Nicole had said, we've done wireless with her. We've done what we call our ATS solutions. We've worked with them in every aspect. And one of the things that she'll say too, she knows a lot of the names on the team. And that's the same here. When you talk about the success, you go through and she starts to name them. And what we're working with right now with her is she's, as she said, it's hard when you're working with different funding to add on new team members, new staff. And so one of the things that we've started working with her on that's coming to fruition is how can we help with that? How can we help with their desktop as a service initiative? How can we help when they need help desk? Help desk has different things than what it used to be before. There's all these end users that have a number of questions and the call volume has just gone up. So those are some of the things that we're working through now, as well as she talked about what's in the cloud, what's not in the cloud. You talk about collaboration. Where do we want to take that? What does that look like? How does it help you if we move this, and what's going to be your positive outcome? So those are all different things that we're working on right now.
You talked about the partnership, and I had a flashback. I'm not sure if it's a good one or a bad one. I think it depends on how you take it. But really, in terms of partnership, because this was I think it was right before the pandemic. Really, we experienced an issue with our 911 system. We really didn't know what it was. We didn't know if it was a network. Like, we really could not figure it out. And when you talk about a partnership, I mean, Greg and some of the other folks, I mean, they were there all night. And I mean, all night. I'm like, so who does that, right? Like, that's a partner that cares and stayed with us literally through the night so that we could help figure out and track down and get us back on track. And I think that speaks volumes to what a true partnership looks like. So I just wanted to share that example, because you just don't get that everywhere. You really don't. And so I'm incredibly appreciative of that, by the way.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's always that's always a risk factor, right? As a CIO in a, government, town government, right? It's sort of like, hey, why are we going to go push the envelope? Why are we going to really, how much innovation can we really afford to have? Because when you introduce new tools, technologies, solution, innovation, there's risk. And that's scary, right? That can be expensive. That can cost people money, time. In the case of 911, it could, God forbid, right? So I think that's, how do you both think about that balance, and pushing the envelope for what's needed for, to make the town and the community, a really great place to live and work and thrive?
For us, we've had lots of discussion. We all want to get to the future, and sometimes I think it's the fun things, but I think that's just an interest. But if you don't have your basics and your fundamentals, right, and your operations running smooth, you're never going to get that opportunity, because you're always going to hear, I can't get my email, right? The internet access was down. I couldn't access whatever application. So you've got to be really, really good at getting your basic operations like 100%. The other part of that is we're a small team. I like to say we're small but mighty. Incredibly talented folks that are on this team. But we are small. Was it for me?
No, that was me.
We are, we're not going to get a lot more resources. So we kind of have to look at what we have, and then we have to look to the future, and we have to think about the people on the team and their growth, right? Like, we want to keep them. We all know that hiring and retaining is incredibly difficult in general, probably more so, I would like to say, for government. And so we've got to look at how do we keep them challenged? How do they keep us moving towards that future, right? Whether it's looking at, AI or virtual reality or who knows, the metaverse, I'm not sure. And in doing so, we have to look at, okay, what does it make sense that we want to keep operationally like the best of the best, seamless, but how do we not do it, right? So for us, one of those decisions was our service desk. It was to have, NWN manage it for us because we feel 100% or 1,000% confident that there's going to be no impact and maybe even slightly better than the service that our team gets today, right? That across the organization. But then we're able to take those folks and really elevate them and keep them on a continuing learning path and keep them with us and look at, the future technologies. So, that's kind of how we're strategizing doing that. There's a few other things we're also working on. One of them is having our phones hosted and managed as well. So I think of this type of work incredibly important. But with our staff, we need to make sure that we're always looking towards the future. So it's going to be about educating them and moving us forward.
I was going to say, when you talk about your staff, that's sometimes something that's missed. We always talk about what it's doing for the residents, but I agree 100% with you. It's how is this affecting the team? How are we making their lives better? How are we retaining them? How are we growing them? And how are they going to move into their next step of their career? But I just wanted to take a step back and tell you that, because I've seen and worked with your team, and where that is an incredible team, and you've been helpful in each part of their journey as well.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so phase 3, step 3, segment 3, the future. Now, I just saw, Nicole, you posted on LinkedIn, USA Baseball's breaking ground on a incredible facility. I feel like every day the town of Cary is in the news. Meta's moving there, Google's moving there. Riot, gaming has, broken ground on transforming, a whole campus that used to be the mall into this huge facility. You and the team are attracting the biggest and best and most innovative organizations in the world to your town. That must be a lot of pressure, on you and on Shannon as your partner to make sure that you're as innovative as the companies that are moving in. What is that? First of all, why Cary? What is it about the town of Cary? And how are you thinking about the future of your technology investments to keep up with these new residents that are, again, amongst the best and brightest in the world as far as technology?
Yeah, I often say it's a double-edged sword, right? where you've got all these great companies and all these really amazing people that work there that are creative and so technically savvy, right? So you're like, I got to make sure that we're, keeping up. Cary is an amazing place, right? You're located, max 15 minutes from the airport. I don't even think it's that far. You've got universities around you. We have over 80 miles of trails of greenways paths. We've got award-winning park services that are beautiful. And like you mentioned, we've also got, USA Baseball. We've got a soccer park. We've got USA Tennis Park. So there's lots of facilities, I think, that's drawn to Cary. We're doing lots of redevelopment. We're almost out of land, so everything is a redevelopment. The center or downtown is being completely, it looks nothing like when I moved here, when I was like, where is downtown Cary? It's thriving with lots of businesses, lots of restaurants and breweries, and we're now building an amazing brand new park. Although I hesitate to call it a park because there's a dog park, there's an amphitheater, there's play structures, there's a putting green, there's a bar. There's literally something for everyone there. So I think when we start to think about technology, I think really there's a couple things. One, the most important thing, the way we think about it is, for the most part, we don't want it to be seen, right? We want you to, for example, leave your house, come downtown, maybe get diverted because Waze has diverted you, because we have told Waze to divert you, whether there's traffic or an accident or whatever it may be. We want to think about the way you use technology. I'm hesitant to say this because I'm afraid it's going to talk back to me. I use Alexa all the time. So we've got skills built in Alexa to ask when your trash is, your recycling. And actually, if it does happen, every once in a great while, we may miss your trash or recycling. But you can, ask either Google or Alexa, Amazon device, to open a case, say, hey, Town of Cary, you've missed my trash. It will open, right, a case in the back end, and someone will come out and pick it up. So we're really trying to think about using technologies in the way that you use them every day. We recently just looked at, we've implemented a trial of a QR code, because I know we all thought that they were long gone and dead, but COVID has brought them back.
Yes.
So they are everywhere. So now we're testing out technology where we use a QR code that's attached to a couple-minute video. So it might tell you about a new pop-up art installation, or why there's construction on a greenway, or information about our downtown park. So we're really trying to, like I said, just really think about leveraging technology in ways that's important to folks. So whether it's, sensors that look at sound or noise, in our downtown park, because we want to make sure that we've built residents around there. There's actually townhouses attached to the parking deck. So we want to make sure that we're tracking the sound for our residents when there's activities. We want to look at any type of pollution also in the park. We want to, count people, just so we can tell when times are busy or where they are, so that as we look at activating the park in different ways, whether it's classes or other types of, concerts or whatever it may be, knowing where people are and how they move helps us figure out the best way to serve folks. We also have movable furniture, which will be tracked to see where that ends up at the end of the day. But it's really all about just finding ways to better serve our community. We do have an aspect of, I like to call it delight, where we like to go maybe a little bit above and beyond, right? So if you're in the park, we want to be able to tell you, what the weather might be, if there's rain coming, where you can get shade and water if it's the summer. So I think, it's really important for us to think about our community and the needs that they have. And if there's a way that technology can make that better, then we want to leverage it.
And you talk a lot, Nicole, on all these. I get a little bit overwhelmed. I can imagine that you do too, as you talk about all these different projects that I'm sitting there as a resident. Oh, cool. I can't wait for this and that. But how do you vet all of those requests and determine how you're going to, with both the funding to support that, as well as the resources? How do you determine what actually comes into play?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I can tell you, honestly, we are learning more and more on probably how to better do that every day, because I'm like, let's just do it all. So I think going back to the way we did the campus was one of the best ways when we thought about it, because we did the way we structured that was we would allow you to test technology on campus, but it had to be no or very low cost to the town. So we would kind of provide the infrastructure. We would both learn, right? The companies and the town learn. And then if it was something that we figured at the end of whatever deemed period of time we wanted to implement, we created a vehicle for implementation. So for purchase without having to go through RFP. So that's one of the ways that we look at how do we structure and where do things make sense. So there's a lot of things we'll say, okay, we'll test it, but we're only going to do a pilot of it. And financially, it's got to make sense. So in a couple weeks, well, it's not a couple weeks, maybe May 2nd, we are implementing for 6 weeks an autonomous shuttle in Bond Park, one of our big parks. Now that's in partnership with NCDOT, right? So, but we're both learning. We've put up a temporary signal actually in the park so we can test out how a autonomous shuttle would do with the signal. But that's in partnership. So we're paying a certain, there's a split. There's like a 50-50 split there. And then the company that's doing it, Easy Mile is the vendor that supplies the shuttle. They're, kicking into. So it kind of depends on, is there a funding structure that makes this attractive to do? Is there technology that we want to test out? Are there things that are just priority that we need to get done? Like the wireless, in the parks, like that is like, we've got to get done. But something like the shuttle, was made more attractive because there was a funding source. We also have we've got a big mixed use community, Fenton, coming, I think goes live next month, and a couple others. And we're actually building a new facility for e-gaming. You talked about gaming, but e-gaming. And so I think about the opportunity there for developers, right? Or even like a SAS campus or MetLife, wherever these campuses are, to look at this technology. They can come and look at it. Maybe it's important for them. Maybe it's a transportation mode that they would like to put on campus, but they're not necessarily going to go test on their own. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in terms of economic development also. Obviously, as well as learning, what does an autonomous vehicle look like? How much, data can we extract and what can we learn from it? So that just kind of gives you a little bit of a feeling as to how we think about it. But each case is so different, where we do business cases on everything that comes in.
Yeah. And I've heard you say in many times, okay, how are we going to get this data? I can't just do it because somebody's asking, but how am I going to retrieve this data and what are we going to do with it? Can you talk a few minutes about that and why that's important to you? Yeah.
I mean, I think anyone you'll talk to, it's all about the data, right? And how do we learn from it? And that is a continuous evolution for us. And we've got a big data management program that we're kicking off that's going to help the entire town, because I think we're all pretty good in doing it in our isolation in our departments, but how do we really look at things across the organization? We also, we have sensors on our stormwater, and we're sit at the top of the river basin. So the stormwater is going to flow down to Raleigh. And we worked regionally with Raleigh and Wake County and Morrisville and a couple other communities to figure out how to data share, which was huge. And what does that look like? Because we understand that Cary's not a bubble. As much as we would love it to be. Can't leave the importance of looking at things regionally. So that's another area when we talk about data, is how do we share that regionally and make sure that we're all able to do that. So we've put structures in place. I will say that this area, it actually blows my mind at how collaborative people are. There were some hurdles to get over, I think, with the stormwater. Just, I think people are just afraid of, my data's messy. Well, we know everyone's, Yeah. But it's an incredibly collaborative area. So we also, as we think about Cary, we also think about the greater region, because while we have residents, we also obviously have people that come to work, right? Come into work to commute to Cary and use the restaurants and, the facilities. So we really kind of also look at it from a regional aspect as well.
That's great. Data. So
Yeah.
let's transition a little bit to wrap things up. At the beginning, we talked about, that you're both, incredible leaders. You're also incredible women. Talking about the importance of STEM, for our girls, in elementary, primary, secondary schools. Any advice, or maybe, what impacted you to kind of take this path, whether it be on the, Shannon, on the management side of really, driving these partnerships, and as an entrepreneur, Nicole as a CIO, as a technologist. What would you tell to Zoe Gilman, who's 8 years old, who just had her STEM fair at school and, was really getting into it?
It's so interesting you say that, because technology is just broadened, right? Like, I think about it often, because I know you're talking about your daughter, but there's so many different areas, right? Whether it's the design, my son is actually in school doing visual arts, so that's a lot of animation type work, right? So there's so many different aspects to it that I think is important to share, especially with young girls, because sometimes I think they see it so very narrow as I'm just sitting behind a computer and I'm coding, and that's not really it. There's just so many different aspects to it. There's great programs now. I think the world's changed a little bit too. I think I'm going to speak for Shannon. I think probably her and I will have a different path than any of the young women, which actually makes me happy. I think it's very important for us to support other women as well, but it's been a strange and sometimes difficult path, but so rewarding. It's so incredibly rewarding. I love the work that I do, and I just see there's so much opportunity, especially for young women, to get out there and and really change the world, right?
And like you said, Nicole, everything has changed, and technology being one of it. I remember that I used to go and talk. It was a group called Witty, where it was trying to get young students into both technology and science. And when I would go up and talk, they would say they thought that they were going to be database programmers. They thought that they were going to be behind the computer. And like, wait, what are you doing? Let me tell you a little bit about it. So I think that it's sharing those experiences, and with technology, it is in the forefront now. It used to be, I used to go it used to be in every basement. Every office I went to was in the basement, and now it's in the forefront of change, and we can't be successful without it. So how cool is that we get to define and develop that?
Absolutely.
I would tell them to
So,
definitely go into technology, Andrew.
Well, that's a great way to wrap things up. Nicole, Shannon, thank you both so much for your time, for your insight, for your leadership. Now if you get rerouted on Waze that Nicole and Shannon had something to do with that. There was some network sensors that hooked into Waze that you guys partnered up on for many years. If you see an autonomous robotic taxi that's hooked up to the network, that was Town of Cary and NWN Carousel partnering up for many years. So thank you both so much. Really, appreciate the insight. So many cool projects. I would even consider moving to Cary based on just this conversation. It sounds like Disney World for a family to have your services at the 3 clicks of a button. My trash is, they missed my trash last week, and forget it. It's going to be overflowing.
Just got to talk to your assistant, your little voice assistant.
Exactly. Talk to Siri or Alexa. Well, with that note, thank you so much for your time, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Excellerate podcast. Thank you.